The National Rifle Association has come out to say that the real problem isn't guns, but instead violent video games.
Violent, yeah, I want to see some violence.
The most horrible depictions of graphic violence and sex.
To kill police officers. To drive over pedestrians. Spray other people with Uzis.
He was given a murder simulator.
Today we are talking about the most violent, gory, bloody, sadistic, and mean-spirited games the PlayStation 2 has to offer. The kind of games our parents thought we were playing when we were playing Grand Theft Auto because they had no idea just how gnarly things could actually get. I'm talking about games that make Vice City, God of War, and Resident Evil look like they're rated E. Games that make you feel like you need to take a shower after playing them to get the stink off. Games that most channels aren't going to cover because they're scared of the video getting age restricted or demonetized, but I'm not scared of that. You know why?
Because I'm fucking stupid.
In preparation to this video, I sifted through over 30 M-rated PS2 games that warned of the presence of blood and gore, and we're going to talk about a lot of them. If I missed a game that you think should have been here, it's likely because I didn't think it was bloody and gory enough, or I just didn't find it all that interesting. We've got a lot to cover, so snap on your raincoats, lay down some newspaper, and grab the plastic wrap as we dig up the bloodiest, goriest, and most sadistic games on the PlayStation 2. Now, if you know anything about me or anything about my channel, you know that I've got a bit of a penchant for cool games that suck, and no game on this list is as deserving of that designation as Jaws Unleashed, a game that is exactly what you think it is. You play as the shark from Jaws. Taking place 30 years after the events of the film, Jaws returns to Amity Island, putting all humans, animals, and license plates in imminent danger, making for what some have referred to as Grand Shark Auto. This is because while the game is able to be boiled down as just some pointless fun eating people as a shark, it's actually got a lot more going for it than you might have expected, earning such high praise as actually pretty decent. Things start out pretty straightforward, but once we get out of the blood-soaked tutorial that walks us through such mechanics as eating prey to regain health and gain points, charge into enemies and structures, and my personal favorite, holding prey in your mouth and frantically jostling the right analog stick back and forth to rip and tear them into pieces, things don't actually remain this simple for long, as Jaws Unleashed is, believe it or not, actually pretty ambitious. While we've got plenty of gore, blood, and dismemberment to go around, we've also got stealth mechanics, an optional first-person mode, a load of side missions, boss fights, a stat leveling and point system, as well as a pretty impressive open world to explore. You're not just swimming around the open water eating people as I had naively anticipated. You are in actual levels with legitimate objectives that in any other game would be pretty standard stuff, you know, like finding keys, escaping from areas, finding side quests, etc. But here's the thing, you're doing all of those things as a shark. For example, in one level, you have to get a key card and use it to unlock a door. Pretty simple stuff, right? But again, I can't stress this enough, you're a shark. How are you going to do that? Well, by lurching onto a sidewalk, snagging the scientist holding the key card, and dragging his lifeless body over to the locked door. Obviously. Oh, and have I mentioned that this game is actually butt-fuckingly hard? Not only is it hard because of the inordinate amount of enemies and bosses trying to kill you, but add on top of that how unwieldy a game like this one is to play, and you've got a bone-crushingly difficult experience. Eventually, you totally forget that you're a shark nom-nom-nomming motherfuckers because you're so focused on not dying and trying to fight the camera. Even fish are trying to kill you in this game, man. Whose side are you on? Jaws Unleashed has two types of cutscenes. Narrative cutscenes, where characters from the film discuss the plot, which are all for some reason recorded on early 2000s Logitech webcam microphones.
To the safety of our vacationers or the citizens of Amity.
And we'll soon have the shark tracked and captured with the use of our Aurora 2 research vessel.
But the other type of cutscenes focus solely on showcasing the death and destruction we're causing thanks to being captured in a public zoo. While this is certainly not as polished and modern feeling as a game like Maneater, it's still really impressive for the time and at the end of the day, one of the most unique, wild, and bloody experiences on the PlayStation 2. When it comes to finding bloody PS2 games, of course we have to talk about the myriad war games that landed on the console, which were by and large much more unflinching in their approach than much of what we see today. This was, of course, during a time when edginess was very much in fashion, and with shooters and realism on the rise, you bet we saw plenty of graphic depictions of war, but not all of them were necessarily graphic for their use of gore alone. For example, on the more realism side of things, we've got Guerrilla's 2004 Vietnam epic, Shell Shock Nam. Shell Shock takes an unflinching and often brutal look at the Vietnam War. And when I say unflinching, I mean it.
You collect any trophies yet? Man, I want some of that primo Viet Cong meat on my bayonet.
I will never surrender. I will die with honor for my country. And you Americans, you all go to hell.
However, on the opposite side of Shell Shock, we've got Rocksteady's Urban Chaos, which is kind of like a bloody version of Paw Patrol that feels like something the DARE program would develop to convince 8th graders that they're the coolest.
If you suspect someone you know to be a gang member, please contact your local police department.
Conflict Vietnam and Brothers in Arms Earned in Blood are also on this list, and they kind of take more of the grounded tone of Shell Shock, but add in squad elements of something like SOCOM, but none of these games compare to my favorite one in the war pile, which is Ravensoft's Soldier of Fortune. A game seemingly so grisly in its depictions of violence, the publisher included a warning on the back notifying customers of violent subject matter, and even go so far as to include a low violence option in the menu. These two aspects alone are worth more than 1,000 good reviews for a degenerate like myself. Similar to Jaws Unleashed, Soldier of Fortune tells us right up front what time it is.
It's time to stop.
In the opening cutscenes, a guy covered in tribal tattoos named Saber is lining people up in a decaying subway station, just blowing their fucking heads off in fully uncensored goodness. What's even more endearing than that, if anything could possibly be, is the game's dismemberment system, which sees us shotgunning away limbs to the sweet music of enemies howling in pain, hopping around and holding their stupid little stumps, or holding their crotch and doubling over if you disable auto aim and just shoot everyone in the dick, which you can totally do.
That's not cool, Butters. You don't shoot a guy in the dick.
I also have to shout out the I don't give a fuck confidence of this game not to choose an actually good font or come up with their own font for the title and just go with the most basic and free army font possible. I love it. You know how the dinky little hole-in-the-wall taco shops are always the best in town? That's kind of what Soldier of Fortune is to me. They're not wasting time and energy on a flashy logo, intricate dishes you can't afford and probably can't pronounce. You're getting steak, tacos, and churros for $3, and they have to put signs up telling patrons to stop grabbing the salsa with their bare hands. That is Soldier of Fortune. Everything from the font to the hazy excuse for a story, multiple warning labels, and incredibly fun, snappy gameplay communicates everything we need to know right from the first level. We're gonna kill shit, it's gonna be super graphic, a hell of a lot of fun, and you're gonna like it. I also really appreciate that you can turn off the blood and gore in the main menu, not because I'm some kind of prude, but I think it's great that you could trick your parents into thinking it's not really all that violent, just to flip that shit right back on and blow people's willies away while they're taking a piss. Okay, so we've been having a lot of fun splashing around in the tub of more obscure games, so let's pivot into something a bit more infamous for its belligerent use of senseless violence with Volition's 2005 adaptation of The Punisher. I am a huge fan of the 2004 Punisher movie starring Thomas Jane, and I always kind of wish they would have taken more from the incredible writing of Garth Ennis and all the tremendous work that he's done for the character over the years in some of the best arcs in comic book history. So imagine my excitement when I realized this game not only stars Thomas Jane, but pulls from both the Kick-Ass movie and the work of Garth Ennis.
You're supposed to be dead.
I've heard that before.
And with that, Marvel's PTSD poster child has returned to poop everyone's party because killing is his business, and business is good. garden spike defenestration, living human incineration, electric eel electrocution, eyeball gouging, rhino goring, curb stompages, forklift maimages, taint splitting, coffin combusting, toilet seat beating, piranha feeding, piano playing, well wishing, ivory impaling, fire poking, nose tickling, snake feeding, jet fueling, badassery. You may not believe me, but it's not just the fun kills and torture that makes this game such a blast, because the gameplay loop, while as simple as just clearing out buildings, killing tons of dudes with a shotgun or assault rifle, or 2 shotguns and 2 assault rifles, hey, all of this is also just genuinely fun. I mean, in what other game can you hide in a coffin only to pop out and murder everyone at a funeral only to be thanked by the mortician for keeping him in business all these years?
Your handiwork has put my 3 kids through college.
Plus, the way the special interrogations work not only give the player a front row seat in the destruction, but require you to move the analog sticks towards or away from the danger you're dangling your foe in front of, making this experience endlessly memorable and immersive.
This is a catch and release, Doc.
Unlike what the cops and divorced dads may want you to believe, Punisher has never been a character to identify yourself with, and I have so much respect for this team for not mincing any words about that or toying around with any kind of moral grandstanding. This game literally opens up with him killing a bunch of drug users for no other reason than target practice.
Shit, I just want to get high. What's wrong with that?
You're a user and a loser.
But I guess I would be a silly goose for assuming Frank Castle to be a harm reductionist. He's more of a harm enthusiast.
And I thought you couldn't get any uglier.
The Punisher would fight an adults-only rating, and despite eventually receiving an M after censoring much of the glory kills, the game would ultimately have to be cut up and censored further by various rating boards across the world. It's also the first game on our list to be part of Germany's Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons list, an award they should really just put right on the game box. Moving on now to another famed and legendary series that, while perhaps being a bit light on the torture, more than makes up for it with sheer volume of blood, and that would be Terminal Reality's Bloodrayne and Bloodrayne 2, the sequel of which easily taking the crown as the bloodiest game on the PlayStation 2. Bar fucking none. Bloodrayne's funny because it's honestly more famous for its stunning lead character than the games themselves. Like, if you say Bloodrayne to a group of random people, they would maybe have a pretty clear vision of who Rain is, like what she looks like, but may have trouble placing exactly why. I mean, hell, maybe they saw the movie and just figured that that's all there was to it, and a tragedy that would surely be. Because while the Bloodrayne series was never the most technically or visually impressive games on the market, they were at the very least really cool. Taking place in the 1930s, the first installment follows a Dampier named Rain as she works on behalf of a secret society whose job is to find and eradicate harmful supernatural entities and events, kind of like a sexy gothic X-Files. Excuse me, sexier X-Files, cause damn.
Imagine going through your whole life looking like that.
That said, however, we're really not here to talk about the first game, because while I enjoy the vibes and the more earnest and eerie atmosphere of the original, the sequel is where the blood really starts to rain. We're impaling motherfuckers and holding them above our head to shower in their blood like Elizabeth Bathory, removing limbs like a blood-drunk surgeon, watching enemies scream and run as we divest them of their arms, torso, and heads.
Oh, you didn't need that, did you?
If it can bleed, we can dismember it. Blood is just spraying everywhere, and not only can we see it, but we can hear it, which I think is such a fun touch.
Oh, you'll never even miss it.
It reminds me a lot of the blood effects in Freddy vs. Jason, where everyone's anatomy seems to be pressurized by aerosol and blood just shoots out everywhere. Okay, so we've been talking at length about the drippage of the blood, but let's let's take a second to talk about the drippage of these outfits, because holy shit, everyone in this game, good or evil, looks like a snazzy extra from a Panic at the Disco or Alkaline Trio music video, and you just can't help but love it. The platforming in the sequel has become much more advanced and has way more options, and while they all look stunning, it's still kind of a pain in the ass to play, which is such a bummer because I want to love everything about this game as much as I love the aesthetics, but sadly it's just not quite there. And that's kind of the best way to sum up the Bloodrayne games, honestly. A series that was always so close, but never quite managed to deliver the way you would have hoped, because while it is one of the most stylish and mechanically savvy games of the generation, wow, none of them ever really work the way you'd hope. But that's just my experience. If you love this game, like you love it, and you see it as objectively perfect, I'm so fucking jealous. While we're on the topic of terminal reality, I want to mention another game of theirs that I think is terminally underrated, which is their 2003 vehicular combat game, Roadkill.
The bad news is I have a rat working for me.
What's the good news?
Hey, how you doing?
Okay, so here's your elevator pitch for Roadkill. The mission structures and sandbox of Grand Theft Auto, with the gameplay of Twisted Metal and the sense of humor of Tony Hawk's Underground 2. So essentially, the best game ever made?
I need a sniper for this next assignment. Don't be afraid to choke up on it. Two-hander, huh? Oh, what is he wearing?
God, would you shut up and brush your teeth?
That's right, you're playing a vehicular combat game where you never get out of your car, but you have the mission structure and cutscene style of a PS2 Grand Theft Auto game. You can also kill as many civilians as you want. The dialogue is funny and weird.
Uncle Woody's such a fuckstick.
All the stores and locations are dopey double entendres like shoot your load guns, lube and screw, wet hole, got toes. While you get the circus aesthetics of Twisted Metal with loads of clown enemies and characters, you also get a kick-ass soundtrack full of licensed music, including the likes of Judas Priest, Blue Oyster Cult, Great White, Foreigner, Rick Springfield, alongside a truckload of irreverent political and talk show shock jock radio DJs. It's literally Twisted Metal GTA. Roadkill knows exactly what it is and exactly what role it plays within the market. The world isn't huge and the missions are not always that gripping, but it makes up for it with a pretty short runtime. The mechanics are not all that trailblazing, but you get to Mad Max blood bag a dude to the hood of your car and drive around with listening to him whine.
Westbound! Jackson the first number! Signal needs backup!
Okay, look, you guys know how much I revere this generation's horror games. I mean, this entire channel was built upon me playing every PS2 horror game, a feat which I am very much still working on, so subscribe for that. And it's not lost on me that we've made it this far into the list and still haven't talked about a single horror game. And I think that's because for the most part, horror games on the PS2 are a little bit more concerned with atmosphere, dense narratives, characters, and body horror over just straight up graphic violence. But while horror games befitting this list may be few, they are certainly not zero. For example, if Silent Hill says, how do we convey this horrible thing in an artistically dignified way without cheapening the experience with the overt use of blood and gore? The Suffering says, that shit, nerd. We're smoking meth out of light bulbs. You coming or what? Over at The Suffering, we've got atmosphere, a good story, character depth, psychological horror, and a combat system you don't have to justify. You think Resident Evil 4 is the best action horror game of the generation? What if I told you The Suffering allows you to move and shoot at the same time and isn't 2 hours too long? In The Suffering, you play a prisoner named Torque, because that's awesome, who gets placed on death row after allegedly murdering his entire family, and after being put in his cell, all hell breaks loose. Guards and various inmates become eviscerated by monsters with knives for limbs, and we essentially spend the rest of the game escaping from the prison on a blood-soaked journey of self-discovery. Weaponry is pretty standard, seeing us spend much of the game wielding revolvers, Tommy guns, pump shotguns, and the like, but the best weapon in The Suffering is Torque himself, who can turn into a giant hulked out version of himself, allowing us to tear enemies apart like wet bread, much to the approval and applause of the congratulatory voices in his head.
Very good, we've made a lot of progress. progress today.
The monster designs in this game are just as grotesque as they are brilliant, and just like Silent Hill, are largely representative of specific traumas and evil experienced within these hallowed grounds. Since it's a prison, each monster is representative of a different type of capital punishment, being a firing squad, beheading, lethal injection, hanging, etc. Unlike Urban Chaos, The Suffering is disinterested in justifying its violent subject matter with some kind of infantilizing, flag-waving, moral heavy-handedness.
I'm gonna tell everyone what a hero you are.
It doesn't matter if Torque is the good guy or the bad guy, and if you feel like he should be one way or another, you can just play the game in exactly that way. The Suffering allows you to commit completely to whatever version of Torque suits your own vision. If you play the entire game as the good guy and help NPCs instead of killing them, you'll get an ending proving Torque to have been framed and not having killed his family. If you choose to just kill everyone, you get an ending proving Torque was actually the killer all along. The truth is completely in your hands. The Suffering has great atmosphere, the combat feels incredible, the story is both complex enough to hold the attention of the more literary minded and easy enough to follow for those just trying to have a good time, and that is why The Suffering is not only my favorite game on this list, but what I consider to be the greatest action horror game in history. It's right next to Resident Evil 4. I don't know if I would say it's better than Resident Evil 4, but they're absolutely neighbors. Before we get to our final game, we've got to mention a couple games that I won't be speaking on in depth, but do very much belong here, beginning with the very obvious inclusion of the Mortal Kombat series. The PlayStation 2 saw a total of 4 Mortal Kombat games, and they are all equally deserving of being on this list and spoken of in great passionate detail. Unfortunately, I just suck at fighting games. I've got nothing but the highest reverence and deepest respect for fans of these games, but sadly, this is a skill set I just can't wrap my head around. It's an instrument I simply can't play, so I don't really have that much to offer you here. I will say that I love the kart racing features. I think Motor Combat kicks ass, and I'll play that any day of the week. But the other game I won't be including here is the Reservoir Dogs tie-in game to the 1991 movie. This game was initially a huge part of this video, so huge in fact that I ended up writing an entire video's worth on Reservoir Dogs alone and ultimately decided to cut it from this video, and I will be releasing a full video on that game very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Alright, we all knew where this video was going to end up. While I tip my hat to all the games spoken of here today and revere their controversies and hubbub, nothing compares to the final game on today's list. A game Canadian outlet The Globe and Mail called Assembly Line Ritualistic Slaughter. It's less a video game and more a weapon of personal destruction, which is, without hyperbole, the best review I've ever heard for any piece of media ever. It's time to talk about Manhunt. See, many of the games spoken of here today have ended up censored or banned, but none of them have been blamed multiple times for multiple murders, none of them have been continually referred to as murder simulators, and none of them were made by one of the most lucrative, powerful, and influential video game developers working to this very day. Developed by Rockstar North, Manhunt follows James Earl Cash, a death row prisoner who was shocked to wake up after receiving what he believed was the lethal injection. Unbeknown to James, his death was faked for the benefit of a sadistic snuff film ring, and we have just been cast as the lead.
You've had an unexpected reprieve. Do exactly as I say, and I promise this will be over before the night is out.
In order to stay alive, James must sneak through an apocalyptic vision of industrial America, stealthily killing every violent degenerate in his path with as much style and gristle as possible. Now, it's no secret that I'm generally not a huge fan of stealth games, but you probably are already aware that Manhunt is not exactly a typical stealth game. What's made this game so infamous is undoubtedly the execution, so of course we've got to give these some love and attention, because believe it or not, love and attention is exactly what the developers gave each and every one. There are roughly 40 unique execution animations in the first game, and they see us dishing out kills as pedestrian and classic as the good old bag over the head hug, all the way to taint sickling, crowbar impalement, and chainsaw throat singing. It's easy to see why Starkweather, the villain of the game, chose Cash for this job, because you can give this guy basically any object and you will receive only the most skillfully crafted art in return. But as cool as all of this is, I actually don't think the executions are the most interesting or even the most brutal thing about Manhunt. I know we spoke earlier about atmosphere being relied on more than blood and gore in most horror games, but I actually find the atmosphere of the original Manhunt to be far and away the most sadistic thing about its experience. The way I see it, you don't actually have to spill a single drop of blood in this game to understand the depth of its brutality. As you walk around these broken streets, you can just feel the air pushing down around you as it heaves with malevolence. There's a terrifying oppression around every corner of Manhunt, and it's reflected in everything from the perverse caricatures of its villains to the flickering and weaving of the VHS damage across the screen. The world this game takes place in feels like the world you would have a nightmare about if you were dreaming about being in a snuff movie. There are a wide variety of differing opinions as to whether or not Manhunt is truly a horror game, and I think that that's all because of the atmosphere. If you took everything about this game, from the story, dialogue, executions, mechanics, everything, you take this game, pick it up, and place it into Vice City, it would absolutely cease to be a horror game. That's how effective the atmosphere of Manhunt is. Now, you could say the same about, say, Silent Hill 2. Like, if you pick up Silent Hill 2 and plop that into daytime Vice City, would that also cease to be a horror game? Well, I actually think it probably would still be a horror game, but that's another topic for another day. But that does it for today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to get more content like this and to follow my series where I cover every PS2 horror game, during which I will be doing full reviews of both The Suffering and Manhunt as time goes on. Huge shout out to Patreon subscribers, Mr. Nobody, Hot Antonio, and Baron, as well as a shout out to my YouTube members, Baron and Racoon Peddlar. Thank you all so much, and I'll smell you.
This sucks. Change it.